Hey, how's it going? Mike from LI Flies Mike, and as always, the full list of materials will be down in the description below. Today we're going to be using a Gamakatsu Sl12S in size 2-odd, the big game hook, but any suitable size hook should work. Now today we're going to be covering a fly from a fly tire that I've been meaning to talk about here on the channel for a while. I've talked about him in some previous videos, but today we're going to be covering Cowen's Baitfish fly, which is a very famous synthetic fly. And if you don't know Henry Cowen, I highly recommend checking out his website. It has a ton of information on his flies as well as information on his guiding that he does. So we're getting started off here with some 0.035 diameter lead wire, and this is going to help us make a keel on the fly. It's going to help ensure the fly is going to turn over and that it's going to sink properly. So it's pretty important when tying synthetic flies, especially if you don't have a hook that is heavy enough to keel the fly itself. So we're going to get started here by tying this off at an angle, and this allows me to kind of I don't like having the wire bunched up on itself. And then we can start wrapping this here nice and tight. And I usually like to I'll try and leave myself about at least maybe half an inch or so of room behind the hook eye, so that way we have some room to work with. But essentially you want about half an inch or so of lead wire on here, and this will help ensure that the fly is going to turn over properly. Covering this up with some thread here to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere on us. And something that I never really do with a lot of my lead keels, but we're actually going to cover it up with some Bill's body braid. And this is going to help cover up the wrapped lead, and then we can actually tie on top of it later. So that's a pretty interesting addition to tying a lead keel. So taking some super glue here to ensure that this is going to be durable, we're going to just wrap our Bill's body braid forward, covering all of our lead keel. And go ahead and just wrap this down and cut it. Then we can start wrapping our thread back, as our first tie will be back around where the hook point is. And we're going to actually be using some craft fur. Originally the fly calls for polar fiber. Now we've covered this before in our Synthetics 101 video, or our in-depth guide to fly tying with synthetics. But high quality craft fur like Rainey's craft fur is a great substitute for polar fiber if you don't have any. And I don't have any, so that's what I'm going to be using here. They're very similar materials. But the original fly does call for polar fiber. Though as long as you have high quality craft fur, it should work. So now we're going to take some liquid fusion here, and we're going to apply this. Originally he would use Softex to create a stiff spine on this craft fur to ensure that it's not going to foul. But Softex is not the best thing for you to be breathing in all the time, so I like using liquid fusion, especially if you're going to be tying a lot. The liquid fusion can act in a very similar manner. So after applying a little bit of liquid fusion for the stiff tail here, I'm going to tie a little Flashabou on. Now originally the fly doesn't necessarily even have any flash tied in the tail, but the fly also uses a different type of Slinky fiber mix than I usually use, like the SF blends. It uses a flash and Slinky, which is kind of like taking Flashabou and mixing it with Slinky fiber. So just adding a little bit of Flashabou here will help give us some of that flash, but if you have flash and Slinky, that's what the original fly calls for. But we're going to be using SF blends and Slinky fiber today. Again, the flash and Slinky is essentially just taking like a thin Flashabou and mixing it with the Slinky fiber. I'll have to get some and try it out at some point. So this entire fly is essentially comprised of V-ties. And the most important thing about this is using a minimal amount of thread wrap so you don't build these giant thread bumps. And the other thing is using as little amount of material as possible. It's very easy to build up the material too much with these sort of flies. And after having Henry send me some samples of his Magnum baitfish and other baitfish flies that he's tied with synthetics, he ties them very, very sparse. So it's just something to think of. Just keep it in mind as you're tying, because there's going to be multiple V-ties that we're going to be tying here to work our way up the hook chain. Essentially, we're just going to take our material here. We've covered V-ties many, many times on the channel. You just want to have it slightly offset, and then you fold it back the other way and wrap on top. It's a very simple technique, and it helps us build a 3D profile if we want it, or more of a 2D profile, depending on where we position the material. So now I like to move, I'd say maybe about 2 or 3 millimeters forward. It doesn't really matter. You can eye it up depending on the length of the hook and the size of the hook will change how many ties you're going to end up doing. The idea is you don't want too much of a gap in between your V ties to where you see these massive gaps. So you don't have to have them stacked right on top of each other because you'll end up using so much material. But you can see I like to go about a couple millimeters forward and then start my next tie. Now, something that's important here with the shape of the fly, with the Cowen's Baitfish fly, we want to drastically start shortening the length of the materials after the first tie. So you can see these are still a little somewhat long, but I'm going to start shortening the length, especially on the belly side. We can always do some trimming at the end, but the least amount of trimming we have to do means less material that'll end up in the wastebasket. Something to note here is taking some super glue, and I'm pretty much putting super glue on each thread wrapping that I do. This is something that I picked up after tying the roosterfish kinky muddlers, so it just helps make the fly that much more durable. So again, we're just moving along here, shortening the length of the material and taking our SF blends. Again, I think it's worth trying out the Flash and Slinky. I haven't used it before, but it does offer a very different look to the SF blends. So I think I'm going to have to get some in the future, especially for when we tie the Magnum Baitfish perhaps, so we can get a little bit more of an accurate portrayal. But it's a very similar thing. Instead of angel hair in the Slinky fiber, or in the SF blends I should say, it's essentially like a Flashabou mixed with it. So now is where I'm just taking some chartreuse and shortening the length and moving forward slightly and tying our V ties. It's all about building the profile that you want. Now you could take this, we're essentially imitating some sort of peanut bunker-esque fly here, or some sort of peanut bunker size bait I should say. But again, you can modify the lengths and the size of the hook and everything to change different profiles of fish that you're trying to imitate. So moving forward again, using our chartreuse here. Now something to be mindful of is where you tied your lead wire. So I'm kind of working right on the edge of the lead wire bump here. You need to kind of plan your V ties and where you're going to be tying them in according, so you don't end up trying to awkwardly wrap it on something like the end of the lead wire, right? You can see now with the V ties again and Slinky fiber, it's something we've done many times here on the channel, but it's very easy to build up a 3D profile, especially that top and bottom profile that we really are trying to get on a lot of our striped bass flies. And keeping it nice and sparse, you can see we're using a very minimal amount of materials at times if you need to, because we're only using a small amount of thread wrapping before wrapping back our V ties or to secure it. We can pull some material out if we want, or add some in between, and ensure that we're getting the right profile. And as I move forward, I like to spread the material slightly more on the sides so we can kind of cover up some of the lead wire that's covered with the Bill's body braid. So now one of the real things that makes this fly special, or I guess I should say the secret sauce to the fly, is this fluoro fiber, specifically hot pink fluoro fiber. Now we've covered it in depth. I suggest watching the synthetic fly tying material video that we made. But this material has essentially like color changing properties. It's only this specific color, but it'll go from being a fluorescent pink to almost like an orange at times, to a deep red, to almost like a purple, and it all depends on how the light is reflecting off of it. So after talking to Henry in depth about this fly, and especially about this material over on the phone, it's pretty evident that he believes that this makes so much of a difference that after testing and various conditions fishing with this fly, whenever they had a fly with the fluoro fiber, it seemed to outproduce any fly without it a ridiculous amount. So again, it's very easy to say, well, you know, this, you know, could it be this, that, but I don't know, when somebody has that much experience and they say that something like this makes that much of a difference, I think it's worth taking note and trying it out. So I don't think you can say you're actually tying a Henry Cowen's Baitfish if you're not using the hot pink fluoro fiber. It's an extremely important part to this fly. Will the fly work without it? 100%, but I think it's worth spending the small amount of money just to get a pack of it. It's not a very large pack either, but you can see after we did our last V-tie here, we have that hot pink fluoro fiber underneath, and it's given us that nice iridescent kind of gill-like texture to it, or quality, you know? Well, now we can take our thread. I don't like building up too large of a thread dam. I just like having a nice pronounced kind of solid head, so that way the fly is going to be durable. We're going to throw some whip finishes on here, and then we can go ahead and get ready to trim this fly. Before doing anything with the synthetic fly, once I'm done physically put material on there, I like to brush it out. It's going to help ensure that none of the material is folded under itself. So now what we can do is trim the fly, and I actually put this in 2x speed, where I put it in around 180% if you want to get in the specifics. But I just wanted to leave it in full. I didn't want to cut it in any way, shape, or form, because I've had a lot of people ask questions about trimming the flies with synthetics. So you can see from start to finish how I trim this thing. And this essentially comes from a lot of experience working with. Essentially, a lot of this experience comes from tying a bunch of these kinky muddlers that I've done in the past, but essentially I'll start on top and bottom and then start working on the sides. And don't think of it as essentially a 2D pattern, of course. It's a 3D fly, so you got to look at it from all the different angles, and if you need to, you can angle your scissors to ensure that you're not, for instance, getting a flat cut. You can get a 45-degree angle and help kind of shape the fly and taper it. Again, you can see though, other than some of the longer hair up top, we're not really wasting a ton of material. That's why it's important to not tie too much on there, keep it sparse, and also try and get your length of the material kind of predetermined when you're tying it on there. It's okay to leave it a little bit longer, right? It's always better to have it be longer than too short, because you can't add the material, so we can always trim it. That being said, you do want to make sure that it is long enough. Well, now that we have the essentially fly trimmed up, I'll probably do some final trimming after we glue the eyes. But speaking of which, we have to glue the eyes on here. So we're going to take some 3D eyes and some E6000. Now E6000 is something you can get at pretty much any hardware store here in the US. It's essentially like an industrial type glue they use in like construction type stuff, but it's like a much stronger shoe glue, if you will. But we're going to put this on the back side of the eye, and you'll see here once I flip it over, I'm going to apply a pretty healthy amount, and I like to apply it to about half of the back side of the eye, more preferring the side of the eye that is facing towards the tail. And then I use that to kind of smear some of the glue on there. And then I could take my eye and kind of push it down in the glue and then push it back. And that helps ensure that that glue that I kind of neatly placed in one spot is going to spread perfectly behind the 3D eye and not just squeeze out everywhere. And by ensuring that you get the glue on just half of the eye facing the rear, you have less glue that's going to touch your fingers, which if you get the E6000 on the 3D eye, it's a pain to deal with and try and clean it up. Now, of course, after gluing eyes on here, it actually compressed the fiber somewhat. It'll change the shape of your fly slightly. So just by taking our scissors here and trimming this up and cleaning it up, again, it's very easy to get super, focused on the trimming and end up with a fly that you've trimmed way too much material. Even me, sometimes I have to tell myself to stop. So just take your time and be certain not to trim too much off. It's a hard thing to overcome for some people, but you can see here we have the Cowen's Baitfish. You can see we have our perfect peanut bunker shape here, or profile on this fly. Now, just to finish it off, after the E6000 dried about 2 or 3 hours so, generally 24 hours before fishing, but you can about 2 or 3 hours before we apply another glue. We're going to take some liquid fusion here, and we're going to apply this to the top of the 3D eyes. Now, liquid fusion is a water-based glue, and it thins very, very light, so you're not going to see, it's going to dry and be essentially just like a thin layer or coat of this glue. And it's a nice way of ensuring that we have glue on top and bottom of the 3D eyes, making certain that the fly is going to be as durable as we can get it, and these eyes will last as long as they can. It's pretty much the strongest way that I've found ensuring that 3D eyes will stick on, as opposed to like the tie-on 3D eyes where they use those like tabs, if you will. Essentially just spread the liquid fusion over the eyes, ensuring that it is touching the base of the material 360 degrees around the eye. And then we're going to take the liquid fusion and spread this around on the thread wrappings, just ensuring that it's going to be nice and durable. Now, something we don't want to do is we don't want to get the liquid fusion on the material top and bottom. We want the fly just to be straight up Slinky fiber or SF blends. Well, and you can see here, this is the finished Henry Cowen's Baitfish fly. This is a fantastic fly, and he has a ton of different patterns that, specifically back when I was younger, things like the Cowen Silverside, the Anchovy, the Sand Eel. Those flies, I used to see them in Orvis and all sorts of places, and I was always impressed because they were a step above a lot of the other patterns in the boxes. You can see here our fluorofiber throat, and this is really the magic material. You could even see it changing color as I move the fly here slightly, so in the water it's going to have an even greater effect. But again, I'm very impressed with this fly, and you can see here in the tank the craft fur or the polar fiber tail has a ton of action in it. So even with a synthetic fly, it has a ton of action. Now you could obviously take this, we could tie some hackle in. You could even take hackle probably and tent it over the craft fur, something I haven't tried, but that would probably be a fantastic addition. And again, finding ways to incorporate more movement into a synthetic fly is pretty important. Even though the entire fly is made up of synthetic materials, it has great action in the water. And the lead keel helps ensure that the fly turns over properly every time. You can even see the fluorofiber here as it moves. It's very, very bright, and it sticks out quite a lot, so I could see it being a pretty important part of the fly. Well, there we go. That's Henry Cowen's Baitfish. Again, if you haven't checked out his website, be certain to check out his website. And he'll actually be on Masters of the Fly coming up pretty soon. I think it's Dan Blanton is next, and then possibly after Dan Blanton is Henry Cowen. I'll have to see. I'll see if I can find some info on it. But be certain to check that out and sign up for it so that you can watch it live. So, and thank you so much to the Twitch subs and the YouTube members here. The support means a lot. I couldn't do it without you folks, and to everyone who watches the YouTube videos. So thank you so much. Again, we have a ton of different flies planned for the channel here, as well as different topic videos or discussion videos, and the fishing season is coming up very soon here, so I'm very excited. And before we know it, we'll be fishing for stripers again. Well, my name is Mike from LI Flies Mike. Thanks again for watching. Have a great season out there this year. And until next time, tight lines.